All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. We're excited to have you all here. My name is Ryan Maloney. I help with the programming. Thank you. Thank you. And on behalf of our executive director, Tracy Hyder-Suffern, and our artistic team of Christian McBride and John Batiste, I want to welcome you all here. How many of you, is it your very first time here at the museum? Yeah, this Zuckerman crowd. This is a new one for us. How many have you been coming? Anybody has been coming to the museum for 2 years? Yes. 3 years? 4? 5? More than 10 years? All right, okay. Very good. Anybody 20 years? I didn't think so. I know all those people who've been coming for 20 years. I don't see anybody here. But thank you so much for coming. The National Jazz Museum in Harlem is here to preserve, promote, and present jazz music. We do that locally, nationally, and around the world. And for those of you who it is your first time, welcome. We'd love to have you back. In fact, you can come back tomorrow. We have another show, and Saturday we have another show. We have 2 to 3 events a week, over 120 public programs that we present here at the museum in a year, and just about every one of those is free. We do that because we want people to come and we want people to just enjoy and be part of the community, be part of the family. So if you're interested, on our website, jmih.org, you can sign up to our email newsletter. It goes out every Tuesday. It just gives you a heads up. What are the upcoming events next 2 to 3 weeks? You can make a reservation on our website for any event that you would like. And we also give you an opportunity to make a donation on our website if you'd like to, in addition to your free RSVP. The programs that we present here are supported by a number of funders. Department of Cultural Affairs here in New York City, New York State Council on the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Van Leer, New York Community Trust Van Leer Fellowship Program, the Gilman Foundation, Ella Fitzgerald Charitable Foundation. A whole bunch of people believe in our mission, and we wouldn't be here without them. And so when it comes to supporting, if you believe in what we're doing, we do ask that you make a donation. This is we're a very small team, 4 or 5 people that make all of this happen, and those small donations do go a long way. And we realize that you're being asked via text and email and on the television for donations in this political election season, but we hope that you would consider supporting us as well. We make it really easy for you. There's a cash box right out by the front door, so if you didn't make a donation on the way in, you certainly can on the way out. There's also a little thing called a dip jar sitting on our front desk. Super easy. You just dip your debit card in there, $10, you pull it out, and it will just charge $10. You don't even have to talk to anybody. Perfect for introverts like me. Yet here I stand in front of all of you. The Music on the Brain series is one of our longer running programs, and it's made possible through a partnership, and a very important partnership to us with Columbia University and the Zuckerman Institute. And this doesn't happen without Kent, so let's give Kent a shout out. Hey Kent, thank you so much. A program that started with artists in residence at Zuckerman, Helen Sung, a number of years ago, has kind of grown and blossomed, and we've worked with a number of different artists and many different neuroscientists, and it's a fascinating opportunity for us to look at elements of music and how music impacts our bodies through memory, through movement, through dance, through all of these different things, and then we get to sit down with a neuroscientist. And it's great to see the dynamic between the artist and the artist scientist and how they kind of work together to unpack some of these concepts. And tonight we're really excited. We're always really excited, but tonight is extra special because an artist that we've been working with here at the museum for a long time is stepping into the artist role here on Music in the Brain tonight. An incredible pianist and vocalist, band leader, composer, has a new record out, Seems. So if you want to check it out, please welcome, everybody, Kelly Green.
Thanks for coming. I'm going to sit here because I'll be demonstrating some things as well. So we are going to first basically just be talking about how music changes our perspective. So we also have something visual too. So we're not just talking about just music, because music can evoke a lot of emotion within itself and a lot of different things, or similar. And we're going to have discussions between each other and with the whole group to see how similar or how different. And then David is going to explain in a scientific way what might be going on, some of the factors that we might be able to actually study and quantify. But we're going to start with how music, and I find this personally when I'm watching a movie, you know, I think all the time as a musician, oh wow, this scene would be so different without the music. Or maybe it might not be anything without the music. You know, sometimes the music really determines everything about it. So we've selected this scene from an iconic film. We're going to play it without sound, and then we're going to talk about it. So I guess while we're watching it, we don't have to watch the whole thing to know. The first question, how many of you are not familiar? Not familiar. Okay, a couple people. Right, that's great. Because I think having an open mind with it will allow us to kind of see it in a more open way and not have any preconceived notions about what it's supposed to be and what the current music is, right? So just see kind of what kind of vibes we're getting from the actress. For those of you who don't know. Those of us who do, we all kind of know what's about to happen. So then we're going to watch this again, and I'm going to play it. We're going to watch it 3 times, and I'm going to play in 3 different ways, and we're going to see the different emotional interactions that we're having, feeling. And how it affects our perception. See, even silent, it's very different than with the music that they have. You may not have seen it without the music yet. Okay, so we'll pause here. Anybody who hasn't seen it, what feeling are we getting? Because those of you who have, we already know what it's about, right? So somebody who doesn't.
I guess it feels quite ominous here. Ravens are very strong metaphorical symbols.
Mm-hmm. Right. And what about the actress? What was she giving? Yeah. She's afraid, she's anxious, she's got the cigarette. Okay. So here we go. Let's see what we can do. Okay, so before we all have like a chat with everybody involved, just check in with some of your friends or maybe a new friend that you're sitting next to, see what they thought about the feeling that was evoked, and then I'm going to do another example in 1 minute. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, you ready for version 2? Okay. Version 2. Here, this is so fun. You guys are already amazing. All right, we're going to do the last example now. Last example, maybe a little shorter this time, and then we're going to all share. We're going to call on some people. We're going to share the different reactions that we had. So here's the last example. Here's the last version. Oh, so what we're really interested in is the perspective, right? Did you find, by a show of hands, we'd love to hear from what you felt. Did anybody feel something different than the person next to you based on the different music?
The first one felt like an actual horror movie. The second one felt like it was more comedic, and the third one felt like a love story. It felt like she was about to like turn to the left and like bump into someone, drop all her books or something.
Yeah. So in general, everybody kind of had it. That's interesting. So we had a consensus. No. Who had something different that was different than the person next to you?
I think the third rendition of what you played, it actually took me out of the music and out of the movie,
Yeah.
and it brought me. All I could think about was the Beatles,
Yeah.
and I had no connection to the movie at all. The first was kind of horror, girl, run, the birds is coming to get you, and the second was very comedic. It almost felt like, oh, I'm sitting in the park and I'm having a nice little chat with my bird friends, and nothing bad's going to happen here. So those are just three different iterations.
Oh, that's what I was going for.
Oh, okay, good.
So great. So great. Anyone else want to share a little bit about how they...
We had different perspectives, but from the non-music to the music, right? At least I saw the movie before, so
Right.
I felt the fear, but one of my peers here thought it was just a nice day out smoking a cigarette. So that's a different perspective, yeah.
Right, and so that's just one small example of how powerful music is and sound on our perspective. So we're going to invite up David to come talk to us. So we're just talking about how music can affect your emotions that you're feeling when you're watching a movie. And now David is going to explain a little bit about why different people might have different reactions and react differently to the same film, same music.
Yeah, and before I do that, just one more round of applause for Kelly Green on piano. That was absolutely incredible. We planned this session out, of course, but like seeing and hearing it all live, it was just perfect. Yeah, so I'm David. I'm a neuroscientist at Columbia University, just down the street, where I study a number of different things. One of the things that I study is how people process movies or sensory information. And so I got into this a few years ago when I was doing some work just after I finished college. And I was working on this experiment, which is a kind of classic experiment in the psychology world, where you'll stare at a fixation cross like this, so people just look at the center of the image, and then a bunch of faces will pop up. And this is a kind of task that's supposed to study something about how we process emotions. And so you might take a patient group of people who have depressive symptoms, and you have them do this task, and you say, press a button every time you see a happy face or a sad face. And I was doing a bunch of these tasks because I was 20 years old, and I was a little guinea pig for all the graduate students who were hanging around. And I kind of felt like I wasn't feeling like that many like emotions when I was doing this. Like there was a cognitive thing, like I'm thinking really hard, okay, happy, sad, happy, sad. But it didn't really make me feel anything, at least nothing like what I was feeling when you were playing piano and we were watching this movie. So I kind of thought, like, surely there must be another way of studying emotional processing. And, if you have a heart condition, then when you're getting evaluated at the hospital, your doctor might have you run on a treadmill to kind of bring out, like, some of that cardiac difficulties, right? And so we sort of think about movies, and we being me and other people who study them, as being like a sort of stress test for, like, the emotional processing, and specifically like for depressive symptoms, anxiety, things that are related to the kinds of emotions that we feel when we watch movies. And so movies are very naturalistic. Like as you saw here, there's just like a bunch of faces popping up. Rarely do you like walk around the street and you just see face, 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 face. But movies, you got auditory information, visual stuff happening. And so like for example, I'll bring up one movie that I like a lot. This is from a movie that features John Malkovich. Maybe you're familiar, and a lot of the scenes being John Malkovich, and we'll see a little glimpse of him over there. And so, especially in this kind of movie, you can sort of see that movies kind of like mirror what we're experiencing as we're walking through the world. And so we call this kind of experiment maybe naturalistic neuroscience. And of course, movies aren't fully naturalistic. There's usually someone behind the scenes making a lot of decisions about what's going to happen at moment A versus moment B. But still, compared to the faces that I showed you earlier, hopefully you can kind of get a sense that this is a different kind of paradigm and it evokes different kinds of feelings, and maybe we can tease out some of these differences and maybe use them to do things like diagnose, prevent, and treat illnesses like depression.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
So you answered my first question, which is perfect. So now my next question is, what's happening in the brain when we see an image and hear a sound?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so maybe I'll do a little example here. If I, ooh, that was not that loud. Like clap my hands, every time I clap my hands, everyone's brain in this room, assuming you can hear the sound of my hands clapping, there's parts of your brain that are responsible for processing different senses. So right on the sides of our brains over here is auditory cortex. You got one on each side. And every time I clap my hands, neurons in that part of the brain will spike, or they'll have electrical activity. So I'll just advance my slides a little bit. And so if we look at a picture of the brain, this is what your brain looks like, generally speaking. Maybe it's less blue, but the shape is right. And over here, right on the sides, again, is auditory cortex. And so every time I clap my hands, neurons in that part of your brain will fire because they care a lot about incoming auditory information. And then I should say that I study humans, and in humans, we don't like to put electrodes into people's brains to record the neurons. So instead, we use fMRI. Maybe some of you have been inside an MRI machine before. fMRI uses the same kind of equipment to take videos of the brain while it's doing stuff, so the brain in action. And so with fMRI, we see kind of a smoother, like more drawn out response, but that's still time locked to each of these claps. And so for everyone in the room, if I stuck you inside an MRI machine and took pictures of your brain while you were listening to me clap, number one, you'd be super bored, because that's not a fun experiment. But number two, we would see this part of the brain light up over and over again with each clap. Okay, we can do the same thing for the visual part of the brain. So over here in the back is visual cortex, and this is just a little part of it. And this part of the brain, as the name suggests, would respond to light or visual cues. And so if I turned off and on the lights in this room, we would see a similar kind of response, just in a different part of the brain. And then we can sort of think about movies as being just like long series of all these claps and lights going on and off. And the entire brain is going to be involved in processing this kind of information because, again, movies have kind of everything, right? There's auditory information, visual stuff, but there's also like emotional narratives that are going to activate the more emotional parts of our brain. And maybe there's going to be faces popping up, and we have parts of our brain that are specialized for processing those as well. So compared to like a very simple paradigm that would only use one sensory modality, when we use movies, we see everything light up all over the place. Very beautiful images like that. And okay, so now, beyond just one area at a time, like what happens when you're getting sound and visual information synchronously? Okay, well, number one, I should just say, to stick to my slides, we do see certain parts of the movie where we see visual parts of the brain lighting up. So this would be a part of the movie where perhaps like the lights are flickering or there's something interesting happening on the screen in front of you. And then other parts of the movie, we see this part of the brain light up. And again, that would be like maybe someone's talking in that moment. Okay, so the next question would be like, where does the brain integrate sights and sounds? I just showed you where sights are and sounds are separately. Where do they happen together? So these are kind of unimodal brain areas. And then these would be more multisensory areas. So for this image, I just looked over maybe 100,000 studies that have been published and made a map out of all of the areas that light up whenever the word multisensory is included in like the paper's title. And so we sort of see that they're kind of in the middle, right? You have like auditory cortex is more over here, visual is back there, and then kind of everything in between is very associated with the sort of multisensory processing. So kind of like, again, the whole brain is lighting up, but these areas in particular seem pretty involved in combining this sort of information. And so I'm going to talk about one of these areas in particular right now. So over here is the posterior superior temporal sulcus, or PSTS. And I want to show you guys an example of a task that this particular part of the brain is super involved in. So this is called the McGurk effect. Has anyone heard of the McGurk effect? Does this mean anything to anyone? Thank you, Rachel. Okay, wonderful. This is great. This will be a fun little experiment. So I'm going to play you guys a series of videos, just like Kelly did before, and I'm going to ask you some questions about what you see and hear, okay? So let's start with the first video, And I'd like everyone to just watch the screen, and you're going to tell me what you heard at the end of the video.
Ba 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 ba.
Okay, so Kelly, what did you hear when you were watching that video? What word or sound?
Va,
Va va.
va, va, va.
Beautiful. Are you a musician? Oh, that was so good. Okay, so va va with a V, right? V for
Yeah.
victory. Who else heard va va in the audience? Maybe you could just raise your hand if you heard va. Okay, cool. Did anyone hear anything different? What did y'all hear over here, if not V? B as in boy. Did you hear it? V late. So the first time it was like a ba, like a sheep, and then the next time va, right? Okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm going to play the same video again.
Yeah.
And this time, if everyone could close their eyes, and I'm just going to have you listen to the video again, but this time with your eyes totally closed, okay? So close your eyes, and we'll do this one more time.
Ba 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 ba.
Okay, so you can open your eyes. Raise of hands. Who heard something different in that second time around? Whoa, okay. A lot of people, right? Does someone want to share what they heard the second time? Uh-huh.
The second time I heard the rhythm of the beat.
Ooh, yeah.
But
Uh-huh.
there was a part where you could hear the letter B.
Interesting. Cool. Okay, that's great. And you just saw the video where he's doing the V sound with his lips, and so you're definitely primed to hear that as well. Who heard ba ba mostly in that second time? Okay, great. So this is the McGurk effect. What this guy is saying in this video, both the first one and the one I just played, is ba ba. That is the audio. If you close your eyes, you don't look at the visuals. It's ba ba all the time, no changes. But you see his lips moving, right, and making a va sound. And so your brain, so we talk a lot about like music and images and how they're like combined, and usually it's in the context of like emotions, like where we watched that video at the very beginning, and like when Kelly played a different tune, very different emotional feelings. But even at the most fundamental level, before you get to all the emotional processing stuff, your brain is leveraging the sights and sounds together to make more meaning out of each one. It's like a nice evolutionary advantage that we have in terms of like communicating with other conspecifics or other humans. One of the things that make us special as a species, right, is our ability to communicate. And being able to combine sights and sounds at this very fundamental level is like one of the main evolutionary advantages that's allowed our species to get where it is today. So I'm going to show one more video this time, and I'd like you to have your eyes open, or you can close them if you want. I probably won't be able to tell. And this time you'll see a bunch of different images, so 3 images of the same guy making the same exact sound, and just try to look at different parts of the video as he's making those sounds, and then we'll talk about what you guys saw at the end.
Ba 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 ba.
Okay, great. So hopefully y'all had some sort of different experience when you're looking at the V or the Ds or the Bs, right? And again, it's the same audio the entire time. There would be no way for me to play multiple tracks you could attend to. And so again, just wanted to highlight, like, you know, how fundamental this kind of like integration between auditory and visual information is. So definitely very important for like understanding emotions, but also just even understanding what you're looking at any given point in time. Your ears are going to play a role. And so in terms of the neuroscience of all of this, this little area over here that I mentioned a second ago, the PSTS, when scientists inactivate this area, so they use a little tiny magnetic field to kind of shut down processing in this area, you see a big reduction in the size of this effect. So basically, the lower the bar is, the more people are just hearing ba the entire time. And so we see that when we inhibit this area with those little magnets, there's a huge decrease in this effect. And so that gives us good reason to believe that this part of the brain is causally involved in this kind of multisensory integration. And that's what's happening in the brain when we combine sights and sounds.
Wow. So my next question is, so what is, can you talk about the heritability, meaning like how people inherit certain like viewpoints and perspectives? Because that's what we're talking about, how music affects our perspectives. So we kind of had across the boards a similar, but you said you and your friends had a little bit of a different perspective on what was going on based on the music. So what causes those differences?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in general, like artistic media can provoke many, many different experiences in many, many different people. And I have a twin sister, so we grew up watching like the same movies in the house. The TV was on, we would watch the same stuff, but somehow we have like very different tastes. And so I kind of wondered like how much of what we're interested in, our subjective experiences, are governed by our genes or a factor more of our environment. And so that's something that I explored recently in a paper. So a bunch of slides here, some text. This is a paper that was published just a month and 1 day ago, so it's hot off the press. Y'all are amongst the first to know. Wow. Thank you. Very kind, very kind. And in this paper, we asked this question, again, how does the brain process movies, and do people who are more genetically related process movies in a more similar way? Okay, so I'm going to show you a bunch of brains similar to the brain that I showed a second ago. And over here, colors that are more like red or orange means that the brains are like really similar. The patterns of brain activity are similar in those areas. And over here means that the patterns of brain activity are really different. And so for this study, we took a bunch of twins, so identical twins who share 100% of their genes, fraternal twins like me who share 50% of their genes, and then also just non-twin siblings or unrelated individuals. And we scanned their brains while they watched a bunch of movies, so like Star Wars, Inception, all the classic blockbuster films from the last few years. And so we see for unrelated individuals, there's still a lot of similarity in terms of how the brain processes movies. So you see all these colors tend to be more like orange or yellow. And again, that's just because we all sort of share the same neural machinery for processing this information. If we didn't, it'd be really hard to like communicate with our friends because we would all be hearing different things at different times, right? But then when we look at fraternal twins, it might be hard to appreciate if you're all the way in the back, but at least up here, this looks a little bit lighter to me. You see more of like an orange in this visual part of the brain compared to over there. And then for identical twins, it's even more pronounced. And so maybe I'll just zoom in a little bit on this area over here, and you can see in unrelated individuals, not super similar, getting a bit more warm colors over here. And then for identical twins, a lot of similarity in terms of the brain activity in that area when people are watching movies. And so we can do some fancy math with this and basically subtract the similarity of the unrelated individuals from that of the identical twins. And we get this difference map that tells us where in the brain are identical twins processing this information more similarly than unrelated individuals. And so we can do this comparison for all of the different groups that we have. So this was identical versus unrelated, and then all the way down to fraternal twins versus unrelated. And then use some more fancy math to get a map of the brain that tells us what parts of the brain is activity in those areas more due to our genes versus our environment. And to give you an idea of what these numbers mean at the bottom, H squared is an index of heritability. It tells us what percentage of the variability in a given trait can be attributed to genetics versus, say, the environment. So height generally has a heritability of like 0.8, let's say. And so brain responses to movies, at least in some of these areas, are about a quarter as heritable as height. Which we think is kind of interesting because, again, these are like very specific movies. Everyone has different experiences with them. And yet, a sizable percentage of that variability can still be accounted for by someone's genes. And, of course, the takeaway here, I should also say, this is the map that I showed a second ago of all those multisensory areas. And we see that a lot of these areas that are responsible for multisensory integration, the integration of sights and sounds, also seem to be among the most heritable in terms of their activity in those areas is most determined by our genes. So why might that be? One idea is that it's sort of in this like Goldilocks zone of like the very basic sensory areas that are just doing one thing, like auditory areas or visual areas. Everyone's doing the same exact thing because those are so core to our survival that we all have the same exact machinery for processing that information. In terms of the front of the brain, which is this part over here, you see there's not a lot of similarity, and that kind of reflects that everyone's like prefrontal cortex, which is doing higher order stuff, like maybe processing emotions or making decisions, that's like just all over the place. Everyone's kind of doing their own thing. And then sort of right in the middle are these multisensory integration areas where we have like some similarity across people, but also some differences, and those differences can be drawn out by genetics. And so again, just to put it on a pie chart, because we love pie charts, especially when we haven't eaten dinner like me, we see that, again, about most of this variability can be due to the environment, but a good portion is due to our genes as well.
Wow.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. We're ready for the pink.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
Wow, that was a lot. So I think I understand that so a lot of it is genetic, but then as the pie chart showed, a lot of it is environmental, maybe like how we grew up or like something that our parents said to us when we were younger or the way that our parents might have reacted. I think a lot of things are environmental, and it depends on where you are and who you're with,
Yeah.
right? So if you're with somebody and they're like, ah, you're like, oh, maybe I should be scared too. But whereas maybe if you were by yourself watching something, you might be like, oh, this isn't that scary.
Yeah, and environmental here also means just like our history, right? Like our history of experiences. So when you were playing Imagine for like the last iteration of the video thing before, when I was in high school marching band, I had like a big trumpet solo on the 50-yard line in like MetLife Stadium where the Giants play, where I'm playing Imagine by John Lennon, and I like botched it. Like it was the worst that I've ever played. Someone had elbowed me in the mouth, and I had braces like the night before at like the band party. We were playing basketball. It was not like a violent. Anyway, so like one of the worst memories of high school for me is like due to that song. And like the third time that you played it was like much more anxiety inducing than the first time with all the scary music, right? Wow. And that's just a function of my environment, like the experiences I had growing up. And again, like genes are part of the story, but a lot of it is really like what are your individual experiences that make you who you are today, and how that governs your responses or your perspective when you're intaking art like this stuff over here.
Wow, that was not planned, by the way. I had no idea that he. Oh yeah. I forgot. We should ask if you have questions before we move on.
Yeah.
So if you have identical twins who have been separated at birth and have, thank you. If you have identical twins who have been separated at birth and lived and grew up in two different environments, will the patterns then be even greater and more of a difference?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So I should say that all the twins in this study were raised together from birth, so no adoption stuff going on here. But that is like a really interesting way of untangling exactly how much of this is due to the environment versus genes. And so in a perfect world, we would also have another 100 twins who were separated at birth, and then we could very distinctly quantify, like in the pie chart, I sort of showed you like genes and then everything else. And then with those specific groups of people, we could then parse that everything else a little bit finer and say like, what is like due to where you grew up, like the household you grew up in, et cetera. And so I would expect to see like less similarities in those people because their genes are still the same, but now their environments are totally different, right? And identical twins, we think of having like largely the same environment, right, when they're growing up too, which complicates these kinds of studies. So yeah, wonderful question. Thank you for asking it.
Cool.
Any other questions? Cool.
Okay. So I went to the Whitney, I think last Friday or the Friday before, and there was a whole room of this woman's drawings. And they were realistic in a certain way, but also very like fantastical. I shouldn't give too much away because I want to know what you think about it. So I'm going to play a little bit, and then we're going to talk about the feelings that were maybe evoked either from the painting or from what I'm playing or both together, and maybe, just your perspective, your opinion. So now we ask your perspective on the emotions that you felt from the painting, the music, or both together? I guess it's not a painting, the drawing, I'm sorry.
I think generally it felt very like fantastic and almost whimsical, and the music was really supporting that. But I definitely found myself, as there were more kind of flourishes and lighthearted things, I was noticing the flowers and the blooming. And then as dissonance came in, I said, oh, well, there's that fence and that broken down house.
Interesting for me, initially it was very dark and dystopian, and I was thinking rather depressed. And then you played, and it suddenly turned into a fantasy world.
Yeah.
It seemed as though we were walking, it seems as though we were walking in the forest in the beginning, and all the beautiful flowers caught the eye. And then it seems like at one curve we got lost, and then we were back on track, and then finally that little part that you played at the near to the end was like, there's the gate, run. You know what I mean? So that's my perspective of it, but I liked it.
I think it's interesting that almost everybody mentioned movement. Once you started playing, I kind of felt the same thing, that I was moving through the drawing. I wasn't static anymore. And I'd like to hear what David has to say about that later.
I was the exact opposite of that. Hello. And it was because the music was moving, but the artwork is static. And so I was like wanting a movie to happen. And because that's basically it. The picture is static and the music moves because it's temporal.
I don't know. I just felt, just looking at the at the drawing, everything just has this flowing nature to it. Everything's kind of bendy, and I really started at the gate. And to tell you the truth, looking at it, I keep seeing cats. I don't know why, but I keep seeing cat's eyes. So I entered into the whole thing with this, like, why is that cat staring at me? And then as you played, I was like, okay, let's get past the cats and start walking along. And I just felt very flowy. It's a very Phoebe-esque thing to say, so. But it just felt very flowy and wandering as you played, so.
So I was intrigued by the paths and by the architecture of the whole drawing, but as soon as you started playing the music, I literally saw myself with a nice flowy dress, like whimsical, and I was just dancing all through the trails and looking at like I literally saw myself dancing in the past. So I don't know what that means.
Wow. I would just say, maybe it's because I just watched the new Beetlejuice, but I was like in like a Tim Burton movie. Like, that's very much what I was seeing here. And the music didn't align with that. Like, that's not Tim Burton music. That's not Alf Clausen or whoever the composer is. That's not that. So there was like, I was struggling to like find the connection. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. I think one thing that stuck out to me just from listening to everyone's responses is that, number one, there was a lot of agreement between folks on like some of the emotions they were feeling. Like, whimsical came up twice. It's a very specific word, right, to come up twice. So kind of impressive that you're playing Evoke that. And then for other moments of the piece, it seemed like maybe things were, again, darker and like just a totally different vibe. And I'm kind of wondering, like, as a musician, how do you, like, what are the tools in your toolkit for like evoking one sort of emotion versus another? And if you could demonstrate on the piano, like while you describe some of those, that would be awesome.
Yeah, sure. I really loved. What was your name back there with the? Yeah, Marlena. Yeah, I really loved what Marlena said, because it was exactly kind of what I was going for. Like, she really got kind of my view of it, which was there's so much to this drawing. Like, it's so playful and happy, but then there's also like, oh no, don't go down that way. And then like, oh, let's get out, like at the end, you know. And I could have made it dark at the end instead. So my toolbox, right, everything is made up of intervals, which is an interval. Does anybody know how we define an interval in music? Oh, I heard somebody say, starts with a D. Yeah, the distance between notes, right? In Western music, the closest interval that we have is a half step, right? Or you can call it a semitone, right? And then here's a tone. This is the next one, two half steps together, right? So I was C and C sharp, or D flat, and then C and D. And so even just that, just the two notes alone evoke something within themselves, right? And then you have a melody, which is just one note at a time, right? Or you have a chord, which is more than one note at a time, you know? And each type of chord evokes a different feeling. And so the juxtaposition and how I decide to play a chord or a note, also texture is involved, right? I could do something like down here, or I could just hit it once, right? So there's so many textures on the piano, as my teacher Harold Mabern used to say, the piano is an orchestra. The piano, I know, right? He's with us today. He's with us. He is here. But yeah, so the piano is an orchestra, right? So we have all the highs, we have the lows. That's another part of the feeling too, is the range. How high am I? How low am I? And how am I mixing all of those things together? And so, like, you know, the distance between the notes. Like if I play that, it has a certain. Now all of a sudden we're here, where we started here, and then we ended here. So it's kind of a journey in itself, and you're just changing one single note. But you have a reference. Check it out without the reference. It's different when I add in. So all of those elements together, and I can go way into depth about all of the the tools in the toolbox, but I think that's like a good general sense.
Yeah. And one thing that sticks out to me is like a number of things you played, I feel like we are just hardwired. Like when you do like an ostinato, like a repetitive, like aggressive thing, like everyone sort of feels like, oh, this is like, you know, scary, etc. And then also there are some things that are sort of like culturally ingrained too. Like in the first part when we were doing the Birds video, you played a whole tone scale, which I feel like every time I hear that in like a movie, it's like it's a dream sequence or something like that. And I feel like there's something inherently dreamy about that, but also like the fact that I've seen this like, or I've heard this specific scale so many times to evoke that sort of emotion, like the next time I hear it, like I'm brought back to like all of those places as well.
And just so everybody knows, this sounds like this. It's made up of all the whole steps, right? I said we had a half step, which was this. And if you make a scale out of all half steps, it's called a chromatic scale. But if you make a scale of all whole steps, it's called a whole tone scale, which is what David was just talking about. And there's actually only 2 of those. And then you play the next one and you're back to the first one again. And then you play the next one and you're back to the second one again. So there's only 2 whole tone scales, and those are birthed out of the chromatic scale. A little bit of extra nerdiness for those of you who want
Thank you for it. I have another question, if that's okay, and then maybe we can open it up to questions for everyone else. But one thing that strikes me is like particularly difficult if you're a jazz musician and you're performing in like an improvisational context with a lot of other people, is like, what happens if the emotions that you want to evoke are different from the emotions that someone else in your band wants to evoke? How do you negotiate that, like, in the moment? Is it like eye contact? Do you just play more aggressively? Like, how do you figure that out with people when you're playing with them?
It's interesting that you brought it up as like an emotional sort of sense, because for me, it would be like a more technical thing. If somebody's not on the same like beat as me, that kind of drives me more crazy than if, like, because I'm not sure if they're like we're living in a song together, right? So it would be kind of hard to, you know, especially on a song like, you know, Embraceable You. It's like, it's a love song, it's beautiful, you know, we're kind of all on the same page, hopefully. And I don't know if I've been in a situation where another musician is not in the same world as me on the same song. Luca has something.
Yeah, I think that has this song is about this, and this is supposed to be a certain emotion, and they're playing too loud, and it's like, okay, we need to, we need eye contact, we need to establish, like, okay, bring it down, follow my lead.
Yeah.
I think it's also body motion. You know, like I'll kind of, like sometimes if I'm playing a certain song and we're kind of like swinging, like, you know, I wish I knew someone like you could love me. You know, if we're doing something like that, right? And they're kind of like going along, but say on the second half, I want to bring it back down. Hopefully they're sensitive, and I kind of do one of these. If they're behind me, and then I might, you know, so we get to, only you can answer. If you don't care, why let me hope and pray so. And I'll do little hand gestures. Don't lead me on if I'm a fool. Why don't you just say so? You know, and then I kind of give it that. So then if they're going like this, Segang, they're going to be like, oh, Segang? Maybe I should kind of chill and let it like kind of like flourish. So I try to bring them into my world as the vocalist. And if I'm accompanying another vocalist, I'm acutely aware of what they're doing, their body language, their intention, the way that they're phrasing. So even if I wouldn't have sang the song the way they're singing it, I try to accompany them in the way that is what their emotion is.
Yeah, that makes perfect. And even just watching you go through those motions, I like some part of my brain's like, okay, I need to like be paying attention to this right now and like making sure that I'm on the same wavelength. So yeah, that was really impressive.
Cool.
I think we're kind of running low on time. We have maybe a minute or so left. I was wondering, my favorite part of this evening has been listening to you play. I was wondering if you might be willing to play a little bit more for us just to send us out.
Sure, I would love to. Actually, this is a beautiful picture too, although it's not what Ryan would feel with the song. But I'm going to play you an original piece of mine just to kind of cool out the vibe. This one is called Corner of My Dreams, so dreamy piece. Just the thought of you, and I feel new. Lovingly, the sky shines brightly blue. Standing on the corner in my dreams, hearing lots of melodies. And it seems real to me. Could it be reality that it's you dreaming of holding me? So take a moment just to breathe the air, wondering if you'll be the one to care. I feel the rushing blood all through my veins, wondering if you'll understand my pains. And it seems real to me. Could it be reality that it's you dreaming of holding me? take a moment just to breathe the air. Thank you, David, and thanks to Kent, and thanks to Ryan Maloney for having us.
And thanks to you for coming out. Have a wonderful night, everyone.
One more round of applause. Kelly Green, everybody. And I'm sure, David, your recent paper is equally as captivating. So we look forward to checking it out. Thank you guys so much for coming. If you consider making a donation, we make it really easy at the front door on your way out. Thank you so much. Get home safe. We'll see you soon.